Hey, safety champions. First aid in the workplace often means a band-aid or some burn gel, but sometimes it can be bad, really bad. Today we're going to cover the importance of first aid in the workplace and how it will help you reduce costs. Welcome back to another episode of Safety Simon Says, where we empower you to enhance safety in your workplace. I'm Safety Simon.
Safety Simon says be safe, be well. Listen up, got stories to tell. We are champions, standing strong. Together we make right from wrong.
Hey safety champions, today I have the honor of having my daughter Olivia as a guest on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
It's good to have you on the show. So can I start by telling you a story?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So a few years ago, I was at a workplace and I had just started there. And I was getting introduced to everyone. And as I was being introduced to everyone, this one lady who worked in the office said, "Hey, you know first aid, right?" I said, "Yeah, I know first aid. I'm the first aid guy." And she said, "Oh, good." And she said, "Yeah, see, I've got this cut. And can you tell me, is this infected?" And I said, "Sure, let me take a look." She took the Band-Aid off that she had. And what I saw was on the edge of her finger was like this cut that had turned nasty. Like it was red and swollen. There's even a little bit of pus hanging out there.
Terrible.
Yeah, it was not good. So I asked her, I said, "Hey, how did this happen?" And she said, "Oh, well, the other day I was getting all the month-end paperwork ready. And when I was doing that, I was putting one of the boxes together, and I got a paper cut from one of the cardboard boxes."
Wow.
Now, I don't know if you've had one of those, but
yeah.
they hurt. Cardboard
sure
paper
do.
cuts? Ugh. And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, did you go to first aid?" She said, "Oh, God, no." She says, "I just licked it and kept on going." Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah, that was my reaction too. I was like, "Oh,
Gross.
man." Your face was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was like, oh, it was a kind of a grossed out feeling. And I know there's a lot of people that do that, including so many people in the industry, right? They're like, I'll just fix it
Whatever.
later.
Yeah.
But what I learned from that is that the process wasn't there for first aid.
Okay.
And so there's three main points that I want to take away from this story.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the first point is you have to have a system or a way to report first aid and to get treatment.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, you're not in the workforce yet.
Not
You're
yet.
a couple more years before that happens.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is really important is to have a system or a process where when you get trained at your job, you're told, hey, if you get hurt at work or on the job, you need to go and see first aid. This is
makes
how
sense.
you go and see them,
Yeah.
right? So, and every company and business has their own procedure. It may be that, the supervisor is the first aid attendant, or it might be that there's a certain designated first aid attendant and their picture or their phone number is up on the bulletin board in the lunchroom.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways that you can deal with that.
Yeah.
But you have to have a way to report first aid. The problem is that a lot of people are, number one, embarrassed. They're like, I hurt myself. It's my own dang
boy.
fault.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell my boss about this.
Yeah.
Right? Or they don't think it's a big deal. And so they're like, you know what? I'll report it to first aid if it gets worse.
Yeah. Like that woman.
Yeah, she was like, "Oh, it's no big deal,
Yeah.
right? Maybe it'll be fine, right? It's just a
Yeah.
paper cut. It's no
Yeah.
big deal." But the problem is that because she didn't deal with it right at the beginning, now all of a sudden she's got an infection, right? All of those things that I was listing out, those are all the classic signs for an infection. So
Yeah.
she had an infection in her finger.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, it did, because she had to go to the doctor and actually go on antibiotics. And
Wow.
so it turned into this like bigger deal,
All
right?
because they didn't have a system.
All because they didn't have a system.
That's why systems are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that people actually follow the system. Because
Yes.
it's all well and good to say, all right, our process or our system is if you get hurt, you report to first aid.
Yeah.
But if nobody does it, then it's not really effective, is
It's not
it?
effective, no.
So that's one of the things that we need to consider.
Yeah, of course.
So having a system or a way to report first aid and get the treatment that you need is really important when you're setting up a first aid system in your workplace. So the second takeaway from this story is that you have to have the first aid supplies that you need.
What kinds of supplies do you think you might need? I know you need like Band-Aids and alcohol swabs, but what else might you need?
Yeah, absolutely. So that changes province to province because we're in Canada.
Yeah.
But also from state to state it can change. There's different standards. But the basics of it are the things that you need to provide life-saving first aid and to deal with those minor cuts and burns and bruises is basically what you're going to need. So usually there's abdominal dressings, which are really big absorbent pads that can be used for big bad bleeds.
Okay.
Some way to secure. So there's bandages and there are dressings. So bandages go right on the wound and then dressings tie them on there.
Right. Kind of like a cast, almost. A little bit.
Yeah, or the basic way to think of it is like if I had a Band-Aid, but I broke down the parts, right? So when you open up a Band-Aid, there's the sticky part, whether it's plastic or cloth or whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's that white part in the middle.
Right.
That's got some absorbency to it, and sometimes it has a little bit of medicine in it, whatever.
Right, yeah.
So basically bigger versions of Band-Aids that are separated out.
Okay.
Right? Good question. So that's the supplies that you need. And you need to check them on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So it depends on how busy your work site is.
Yeah.
Let's say I'll give you 2 examples.
Okay.
So the first one is if you're in a small office environment, probably the only things that are going to be happening are some minor cuts like a paper cut or I've got a hangnail or some little things like that. So the things that you're going to be checking mostly are things like Band-Aids. Okay. And if there's any medicines or things to clean the wounds with, that's what you're going to be focusing on checking. You have to make sure that you have all the equipment that you need to be able to do the first aid should it happen. We don't want it to happen. Yeah. But if it does happen, are we ready for it?
We're prepared,
Yeah. So checking on a regular basis for an office where, you know what, there's a couple of Band-Aids a month that kind of go missing, probably don't need to check it that often. Maybe once a month, or once every 6 weeks. But if you're at like a busy construction site, there's a lot more potential for injuries. And it depends on the amount of people too, right? If the office has 20 people, not very many supplies are going to be needed. But if you're working on a construction site where there's 100 people, a lot more supplies are going to get used over the course of a week or a month. So you might have to check it a lot more regularly.
And you want to check to make sure that everything's in stock, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to make sure that it's not, I mean, I know like a lot of the stuff can't expire, but maybe some of it can, right?
It's a very interesting point, Olivia.
Most
of the supplies do actually expire.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like even Band-Aids and gauze, as well as things like medications or things for cleaning wounds, most of that stuff expires.
Oh. Yeah.
Now, in the event of an emergency, would it probably still work? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but in the workplace, we want to make sure that it's all up to date.
Yeah.
So things like a Band-Aid, you're like, how could that expire? Like,
exactly.
Seriously?
Yeah.
But with something like a Band-Aid, the expiration is kind of we can't guarantee how sterile it will be after this amount of time. So, you know that paper packaging that the Band-Aid comes in? It kind of has a little bit of a waxy coating either on the outside or the inside. And that's to help protect it from getting damaged before it's used.
Okay.
So if that gets damaged, then it's no longer sterile. So then is it, quote unquote, 100% safe to use? No.
No.
So that's kind of why they have expiry dates on things that seem so weird, like Band-Aids to have an expiry date on.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the second point.
Okay.
All right.
That was a great point.
Thanks. So the third point is that we need to do follow-up and paperwork.
Okay.
So it's not enough when let's say that you and I are both first aid attendants on a job site, okay?
Okay.
It's not enough if Sally Ann comes up to me and says, hey, I got a paper cut. Can I get a Band-Aid? And you say to her, yeah, no problem. And you just give her a Band-Aid and both of you walk away.
Okay.
Right? And the reason why is exactly that story that I told you at the beginning of this podcast, is that lady did the exact same thing. She just kind of was like, whatever, I don't need first aid, and kind of left.
But Sally Ann came right away. Sally
Ann did come right away, but it's
good.
not enough for you as a first aid attendant to just give her a Band-Aid and walk away.
Right. It's literally my job. I have to do a little more than that.
Yeah, and we'll maybe talk about that another episode about what the job of a first aid attendant is, because that's pretty interesting. But for the sake of today, we want to follow up on it, and so that means that we need to do paperwork.
Yeah.
And paperwork is really important. So, because what happens is that we forget what's been going on, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's say it's a busy job site, and you're the first aid attendant, and Sally Ann comes to you and says, hey, I got a paper cut, I just need a Band-Aid. And you say, okay, no problem. But you know your boss is going to want to see a first aid report for every time you hand out something, right?
Yeah.
Like a first aid record is kind of like your receipt for supplies that went missing, right?
Yeah. That's a good way to think of it.
Yeah, so if at the end of the month you do a check of your first aid kit, and you're like, okay, I'm missing 5 Band-Aids and 2 alcohol swabs. Hopefully
you restock.
You restock, but you should be able to go back in your logbook of first aid and see that, oh yeah, on 5 different instances, somebody came needing a Band-Aid for a minor cut, and there's my 5 Band-Aids that, so it's an accountability type thing, right?
Yeah.
But the other part of a first aid record is that it's actually a legal document. Did you know that?
Oh, no.
Yeah, so
Even
it can...
something as small as a paper cut.
Yeah.
You need a legal document.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that's where people are like, oh my gosh, this seems excessive. Like, seriously, I just need
bit,
a Band-Aid and go back to work. But the reality is that in the case of my friend at work, right?
Yes.
Because it got infected, let's say that she had gone to first aid initially.
Right away.
The first aid attendant did a great job at putting a Band-Aid on, but they didn't clean it, which is part of the process, right? When you think of the first aid that you're trained to do, you have to first look at the wound, then you clean it, then you bandage it, and then you reassess, right? So if they don't clean it, and now all of a sudden it gets infected, who's responsible for that? The first aid attendant, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it's a legal document, because like that's a simple example, but there can be serious conditions where something has happened, and all of a sudden you get taken to court.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh, for one little paper cut.
And maybe not for a paper cut.
Oh, okay.
Right? But I'm giving you a simpler example so that, everyone is able to understand kind of the idea behind it.
Out there.
Yeah. But it can be more serious. And if it's more serious, what'll happen is now all of a sudden they say, oh, well, we're not happy with the first aid that you provided. We think that you didn't help. You hurt us. Okay. So then they take you to court, and the judge is going to say, I want to see the first aid record.
Could you go to jail for it?
I don't know about that. I think in really, really serious cases, and it would probably be people higher up in the company that would be responsible for it, because they weren't making sure that there was a system and process in place for that to happen. Because a first aid record can be taken to court, it's now a legal document.
Yeah.
So you need to treat it like that. And people are like, like it's just a paper cut. Like, seriously?
Yeah.
But it is important to document things well. So let me give you an example. I'm going to tell you a story, a very quick story. And then I want you to see if you get a full picture in your head.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm closing my eyes and envisioning.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right. So Jim Bob, my favorite fictional character.
Oh, yeah. And Annie.
Yeah, Jim Bob and Annie. They're walking down the street.
Okay.
Jim Bob falls down. Band-Aid.
How big of a scrape is it?
End of story.
What?
Yeah. I know.
That's crazy.
Right. So do you have a full picture or a full understanding of what happened?
No. It just says Jim Bob fell, Band-Aid.
Right.
What happened?
Exactly.
Did you treat it?
Right. Or how did this happen?
Yeah.
So you're bang on. It sounds silly to say it out loud.
Yeah.
But the reality is, in my current job, I look at a lot of different first aid records.
Right.
And I look at lots and lots of them.
Yes.
Every day. It's so much fun. It's very interesting. But one thing that I've noticed is that that's what the stories I see are.
Oh, so you're saying they need to be more detailed.
They need to be more detailed.
And you learn that at an early age. Right now, I use my planner, and then I use it to, like, usually, I try to stay on top of that.
Yeah.
To write down all my homework so I don't forget anything.
Right.
And then once I have that all detailed, like, if it just says French homework, I'm not going to know what that means.
Totally.
So that's why you're helping me, too, with this
Yeah.
credit. Just to be really more detailed. And I can see, like, you use it in your everyday life.
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. You're bang on there. So having details in your first aid records is important.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, I don't know if you and I have talked about it, like for your agenda, for your planning,
Okay.
but it is really important, are positive negatives.
Okay.
Do you know what that means?
I mean, is it math?
No.
I learned about that in math.
Okay, well, it's not math, but it's basically like thinking of ways that you can describe things that aren't there. So, as an example, when I told you that story about Jim Bob falling down, Band-Aid, you were like, well, how big is the scrape?
What's going on?
You kind of assumed in your head that there was a scrape.
Yeah.
But what if there was a burn?
Well, he was walking.
Yeah, but
What, was he carrying a pot of soup to his
we
neighbor?
don't know that. Maybe. We didn't get the full information.
Or maybe he tripped over his dog Bark's leash.
Oh, maybe.
That's what came to mind when I thought, when he tripped. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, tripped over the dog's leash.
Mm-hmm. So, thinking about the positive negatives. So, if I am doing an assessment, or I'm basically checking somebody and doing
Yes.
first aid on them,
Yeah.
and let's say that they got a scrape.
Okay.
So I'm examining the scrape on their hand, and a negative would be I see an abrasion or a scrape.
Okay.
Okay. The positive negative is that I don't see any swelling.
That's good.
That is a good thing, right?
That's why it's a positive.
Yeah. So I'm writing down things that I see and things that I don't see that form a bigger picture.
Yeah. Details.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a quick story about that.
Oh, yeah.
So a few years ago, I was at a workplace, and this worker had said that something happened at work. Okay? And I'll be honest, like, I love to think the best of people, but
Yeah.
there's sometimes where I'm like, I don't know about
bit
this.
fishy.
Yeah, it sounds a little fishy to me.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for a long time. I
Right.
kind of get a glimpse of like, I think this is not quite right.
Yeah, and you're really good at, like, catching, like, vibes and feelings from unsafe people.
Yeah, it's true. And so I was looking at these first aid reports, and I'm like, something's not lining up right.
Yeah.
And then I had a occupational health and safety officer show up at my workplace.
Okay.
And he said, hey, I'm looking into blank, blank, blanks
Yeah.
first aid records.
Yeah.
I'm asking if you can pull those up for me. I
Okay.
said, sure. I said, can I ask what's going on? And they're like, he's been saying some pretty interesting things to his doctor, and we're just trying to make sure that this all lines up from what he's reported to you as the employer.
Yeah.
Turns out it was a little bit of scam. And he was trying to say that he was hurt at work, and that's why he needed time off. But he wasn't reporting it to us.
Oldest trick in the book.
Yeah.
Everyone's tried to fake sick to avoid going to school or work.
Right?
I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't, but nobody's
Uh-huh.
perfect.
That's true. So by writing down things that you saw and that you didn't see, that's a good way of making sure that you have a full first aid report. So as you're kind of imagining, like, this is kind of tricky,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh my gosh, this is a legal document. What if I say something wrong?
Oh, yeah.
Did I write everything down right? Did I say everything that I needed to say?
Yeah.
So what I did is I took, and you know this, but maybe some of our listeners don't know this,
Okay.
is that I was a paramedic student, And I was a medical captain on a fire department for 3.5 years.
It's really impressive.
And I've done safety and first aid for, over 15 years.
That's awesome. What an achievement.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've learned is how to write really good first aid reports.
That's good.
And I realize that a lot of other people don't, based on the things that I see. Over the 10 years, I've seen so many different first aid reports, and a lot of them are not complete. Okay. So one of the things that I did is I actually created a resource or a tool on how to write good first aid records.
Wow. Where can we find this?
So it'll be at the link in my description here. And I just really want to help people learn how to write these first aid records.
Yeah, it's really important.
Well, so that they can not only protect themselves, but they can also protect their organization.
Yeah.
So that they can protect themselves as well as protect their organization.
Yeah.
So, I think that's really important.
Wow.
And, if we do all these steps, kind of let's wrap it all up.
Okay,
if we do all of these steps, we have a first aid process for people to report first aid.
Right.
We have first aid supplies, and we check on them on a regular basis. And if we do the follow-up and paperwork really well, the end benefit is that, number one, our employees are going to be safer and healthier.
Yep.
They're going to come back to work faster than maybe they did if they didn't get the first aid help that they needed.
Yeah.
And that's going to save the company money.
Yeah.
Do you like saving money?
I love saving money.
Yeah. You saved up some money.
Get all those amazing things.
Yep. And you got your t-shirt that you wanted. Right? And we all want to save money. And organizations or companies want to save money too. And one of the ways that they can do that is by reducing the amount of time that somebody takes off for a work-related injury.
Yeah.
And so all of these things, all of these components of having a good first aid program, you put them together and it actually saves the company money.
It's all a win-win for everybody.
It really is.
The employees are happy and healthier.
Yeah.
And the company saves money. It's a win-win for everybody.
It really is. It really is. All right. Well, that's all for this time. As always, thank you for joining me for another episode of Safety Simon Says.
What one action will you take away from this time What one action will you take away from this time that you can put into practice at work tomorrow?
I'd love to hear what that is. Drop me a comment and let me know. I respond to each and every one of you. If you like what you're hearing here, you should subscribe to my newsletter to get more safety support. You can subscribe at the link in the show notes. Until next time, Safety Simon Says, be safe and be well.
Together we'll excel. Safety champions, hear us yell. A brighter day on safety's way. Join the wave, live another day.